Wait. Wow, it's really dark here. There, okay. Hi, everybody. It's Lori coming to you live. Happy St. Patty's Day to those of you in the United States. Um, I don't know where else to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, but I also know that this is also the uh, Purim. This is the first day of Purim. Um, Actually, it started uh, last evening at sundown as we found out that all the Jewish traditional feasts and holidays usually start the evening before. But this is the first official day of it, and it lasts through, I'm trying to think, Friday or Saturday, I believe. Anyway, so I felt it was very appropriate to talk about all these things that are kind of converging and what the timeliness of it all, as far as what's going on in today's world. This seems to be an appointed time, so to speak, just like Esther um, had her appointed time when the evil Haman set out the decree to uh, for King Xerxes or whatever his name was to have all the Jews destroyed um, in his province. Um, so anyway, um, I'm going to read the book a little bit out of the book of Esther, and so we get a background on this. And then we'll discuss today's. Boy, this is really dark. I'm so sorry. It's kind of getting a little late. There we go. Um, so we'll discuss what's going on today and how it relates to today and how this could be an appointed time, as far as today's events. And of course, we're all waiting, we're all watching and praying for, the rapture, which we believe will be coming very soon. So, we've got a lot going on. So let me just get started with a prayer. I'm really coming kind of doing this. I'm not real prepared for this, to be honest, but it's getting late in the day, and I thought if I'm going to do it, I better do it now. So let me just pray before I get started. All right. Heavenly Father, we just come before you. We love you. We praise you. We give you all the glory. We thank you for this day, in which we celebrate Purim, as well as Saint Patrick, the saint uh, that was a martyr for. He was from Britain, but he was went to Israel. Oh goodness, he went to Ireland and basically to tell others about you and became a martyr, So we just thank you and praise you. And we also remember Esther today and her story and how she was there when the evil Haman was going to annihilate all the Jews in the province under King Xerxes or whatever his name is. So we just lift that up to you. We praise you that we have been brought, we have been born for such a time as this, I believe, and that you um, saw us fit for us to be born at this time and during all these world events that are happening right now, Lord, that are all leading up to the return of Christ, we believe, and the rapture. Um, so we just thank you and praise you that we get to live in such an incredible time. We thank you for going with us and being with us, going before us and behind us, and always being beside us. We love you. We praise you. We give you all the glory in Jesus' name. And Lord, would you please guide my words and of my mouth? And I pray that they would be pleasing to you. Um, Set a guard at my mouth so that only uh, what is pleasing to you would come out in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So, as I was saying, um, I feel it very fitting with what is going on in the world events since really 2020 and, you know, the tyranny that's been coming out, especially over the last year, the censorship, um, the government mandates, all these things. Uh, I feel that is very important that we, just like Esther did, um, we are bold and we are brave enough to speak out, um, and that we've been called to speak out, I believe, for such a time as this. Um, you know, and so that's why I'm sharing this. I believe that this time of the year, um, Purim is an appointed time by God. Um, and that's why, we find the book of Esther and her story and the story of Mordecai in the Bible. And so I'm going to get started. Of course, um, if you, just to give you a background on the story of Esther, of course, King Xerxes, it's XER, uh, XES, I believe it is. Xerxes. I don't know how you say it, but something like that. You have to bear with me, but he was king at this time. Um, and I believe it said he was over 127 provinces at that time. And he had the queen was named Vashti, and Queen Vashti was, the king was giving a feast and invited all of his princes, his servants, and the nobles and everybody. And he invited Queen Vashti to come because he wanted to show off her beauty. She was a beautiful queen, but she refused. So, because of this, Queen or King Xerxes, um, at the advice of the the men around him, his what do you call it? Um, Officers or whatever you call it, the people that he had in charge around him, um, recommended that he put away Queen Vashti and find another woman, um, a virgin woman, to marry instead of Vashti. So he did. He brought all the young maidens, the virgins, to the palace, um, had them, uh, you know, do all kinds of beauty treatments and eat the finest foods and everything. And And then there was it came time where he was to choose another queen, and Esther. He saw, I believe, Esther, and he was attracted to her right away. And so anyway, he made Esther queen instead of Vashti. All right. So that was back in Esther 1 and 2, I believe, and maybe through. Okay. Okay. So then there's the story about, well, it says Esther was a Jew. She, she was uh, adopted by Mordecai, I believe it was. Um, so I believe her father had passed away or something, so she was adopted by Mordecai. And okay, so anyway, that's just a background on them. So Mordecai, okay, so the king loved Esther above all the other women. She obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. All right. So there's a background on that. So then, see, Mordecai was also a Jew, and Mordecai would not see um, King Xerxes had taken Haman and had promoted him to basically the highest rank under him. So, not knowing that he was a bad man, he was an evil man. Um, so, um, it was required to bow down and pay homage, I guess, to Haman. And when it came time for Mordecai to do that, he refused. So Haman became very angry. And because he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided to have all the Jews uh, destroyed, killed, and annihilated in the province and all the provinces under King Xerxes. So that is the background. Now, this brings us to um, Esther 4. I'm just going to go to Esther 4. All right, so Mordecai began to grieve and wore sackcloth, and um, he was very grieved over the fact that his people, the Jews, were going to be killed. And so he began to uh, grieve in sackcloth and ashes. That's what they did back then, I suppose. And so, um, okay. So Esther found out that Mordecai was grieving in sackcloth and ashes and everything. And she tried to send him some clothing for him to wear. And he refused because, there was uh, great mourning among the Jews. There was fasting and weeping, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes because they knew they had heard of the um, decree of the king Xerxes um, under recommended recommendation of Haman to kill all the Jews. See, so they were all grieving and weeping, wailing, um, and sackcloth and ashes. So then Esther tried to send Mordecai some clothes to wear, and he refused. And he sent word to Esther explaining the reason behind his mourning and weeping, okay, and his grieving. So, so this is in Esther 4 then. And verse 4, so Esther's maids and her chamberlains came and told it to her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent clothing to clothe Mordecai, and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. All right, so then called Esther for Hattach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hattach went forth to Mordecai to the street of the city which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened to him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also, he gave him, this is verse 8 now, also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show it to Esther, and to declare it to her, and to charge her that she should go in to the king to make supplication to him, and to make request before him for her people. In other words, she was to go into the king and plead with him not to destroy the Jews, okay, including her. She was actually a Jew. And, request that he would not destroy her people. So, and Hattach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And again, Esther spoke to Hattach and gave him a commandment for Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whoever, whether man or woman, shall come to the king to the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. So, in other words, Esther replied back to Mordecai that it was against the law, basically, to approach the king to come into his inner court, anyone who is not called to be there. So, unless the king holds out his golden scepter, that he may live, that he would uh, basically allow him, whoever, to come to him. So if he did that, if the king held out his golden scepter, then they were allowed to come in. And so then Mordecai commanded to Esther, to answer Esther, think not with yourself that you shall escape in the king's house more than all of the Jews. In other words, don't think that you're going to be the only one to escape the king's verdict. over all the other Jews. Don't think that you're going to be spared, in other words. For if you altogether hold your peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house shall be destroyed. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to return Mordecai this answer. All right, so in other words, um, and who knows if you have not been called um, to the kingdom for such a time as this. All right. So anyway, and that's Esther 4:14. All right, and Esther replied to Mordecai with this answer: Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan and fast you for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. And so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So if I die, basically, is what she was saying. So she called for them to fast. And she said that she and her maidens would fast also. And then after 3 days, she would go into the king. And if she dies, she would die. If she dies, she dies, basically. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So, all right, Esther 5. So now it came to pass on the third day, Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near. So that's how they knew that they were allowed to draw near if the king held out his golden scepter. Okay, so Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. All right. Then said the king to her, What will you, Queen Esther, and what is your request? It shall be even given you to the half of the kingdom. So I'm reading out of the King James Version, so this is a little different for me, but basically saying, What do you request, Queen Esther? I will give you up to half of the kingdom. All right. And Esther answered, If it seems good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. All right. So there's day one, and Esther prepared a banquet and invited the king and Haman to it. And the king said to Esther at the banquet of wine, What is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. So, in other words, now they're going to have another banquet the next day. So then went Haman forth that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up, nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. In other words, he would not bow down to him and pay homage, or he would not stand up, whatever they were supposed to do, at the sight of Haman to pay him honor and respect. So, nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, there's a pop up there, excuse me. When he came home, uh, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him. In other words, he was bragging. Okay. And how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yes, Esther the queen did not let no man come in with the king to the banquet that she had prepared but myself. In other words, I was the only one invited other than the king. And tomorrow I am invited to her also with the king. So another banquet. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends to him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak you to the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go you merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded to bring the book of records of the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. And the king said, what honor and dignity has been done to Mordecai for this? Then said the king's servants that ministered to him, there was nothing done for him. And the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had come into the outward court of the king's house to speak to the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's servants said to him, excuse me, behold, Haman stands in the court. And the king said, let him come in. Okay, now I'm getting a little long with this. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, what shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman in his heart, to whom would the king delight to do honor more than myself? He thought he was the one going to be honored like this. So this was his answer. And Haman answered the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king uses to wear, and let the horse that the king rides upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head, and let this apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man therewith whom the king delights to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So, in other words, he thought he was going to be honored in this way, be able to wear the royal apparel and the royal crown and be sat upon the royal horse and be paraded through the city. Um, but much to his dismay, as we're about to find out, this was not for him, was not intended to be for him. It was intended for Mordecai. So, all right, then the king said to Haman, make haste and take the apparel and the horse, as you have said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew that sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that you have spoken. Then took Haman the apparel and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and brought him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaimed before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. So he was the one that had to parade Mordecai around on the horse. And Mordecai came again to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, to him, if Mordecai is of the seed of the Jews, before whom you have begun to fall, you shall not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. And while they were yet talking with them, came the king's chamberlains and hurried to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So this is the second banquet the next day. All right. So now we're in Esther 7. I know I'm getting a little lengthy here. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said again to Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted to you. What is your request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. Then Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondmen and bondwomen, in other words, slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. Then the king, Ahasuerus, answered, answered and said to Esther the queen. Okay, so that's a different version, I guess, of the king's name. I don't know. Usually, the other Bible that I read out of was King Xerxes. So I don't know. This one is Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. Okay. So anyway, sorry about that. Okay, so the king said to Esther the queen, "Who is he and where is he that dared presume in his heart to do so?" And Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine, in his wrath went into the palace garden, and Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman had fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. Then said the king, "Will he force the queen also before me in the house?" In other words, will he molest the queen in the king's house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, "Behold also the gallows of 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, stands in the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him thereon." So, in other words, the gallows that Haman had uh, made for Mordecai, he actually ended up being hanged upon himself. So, remember that. So they hanged Haman, sorry, on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. All right, so if you're reading on, you'll find out that um, basically all the Jews were spared due to the fact that Esther had the courage to go before the king, stand before the king and his courts, um, inner court, when it was unlawful to do so at the time. But he granted her, uh, to be there. She allowed her to be there and um, asked what her request was, and of course she pleaded for her own life as well as the life of the rest of her people, the Jews. Okay, so because of that, we find out that all of them were um, saved. All the Jews were saved. Um, and Mordecai was granted all of Haman's, uh, well, he was given the house of Haman. Actually, it was given to Esther, the queen, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his ring, a signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So Esther was given the house of Haman, but she uh, gave it over to Mordecai. So, so Esther spoke yet again before the king, fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman, um, the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. In other words, the word that had gone out the decree to destroy all of the Jews. So then the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right before the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces." All right. "For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then the king, I'm not going to even say the name, said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, "Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write you also for the Jews, as you like it, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring." That's what they used to do. They had these seals that they would use on the letters and things. "For the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse." Then were the king's scribes called at that time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day thereof, 23rd day. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies and rulers of the provinces which are from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, 127, to every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king's name, okay, I'm not going to say his name again, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by posts on horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. So, in other words, anyone who would assault them, they were allowed to destroy. And they would take away their enemy's spoil away. It would be theirs. So, upon one day, in all the provinces of King whatever his name, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published to all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. Okay. So the posts who rode upon mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment, and the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and as decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so isn't that a good story? So, and then in Esther 9, it just goes on and said, um, and all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants, the deputies and officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. Mordecai became the greatest under the king. Um, and so the fear of Mordecai uh, fell upon them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house. This is verse 4, Esther 9, verse 4. And his fame went out throughout all the provinces, for this man Mordecai became greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and slaughter and destruction, and did what they would to those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. Okay, and then including this 10, if you drop down to verse 10, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, slew they, but on the spoil laid they not their hand. So they didn't take the spoil, but they did kill um, the 10 sons of Haman. On the day the number of those that were slain at Shushan, the palace, was brought before the king. And the king said to Esther, the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan palace and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. Or what is your request further? And it shall be done. Then said Esther, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow also, according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. In other words, they didn't take any spoil. All right. So I don't think we really need to go on with the rest of it, but you see, okay, so let's drop down to Esther 9, verse 31. To confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. And the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So basically, Esther, okay, so Esther came before the king. This is verse 25. He commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. They therefore, verse 26, they called these days Purim after the name of Pur or Pur, whatever. Therefore, for all the words of this letter and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come to them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves to them, so as it should not fail that they would keep these 2 days according to their writing, and according to their appointed time every year. So this was an appointed time every year that they were to celebrate Purim. And this was a decree of Esther, and the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Okay. So because of Esther's decree, it was written in the book, um, that they would celebrate, the Jews would celebrate these 2 days of Purim every year from that day on. So that's how we got Purim. Okay. So there we go. That's pretty much uh, the story about Purim. So I just wanted to kind of expound upon that and what's going on in today's world with this and, all the government mandates, the tyranny that we're seeing, and how important it is for God's people to speak up and speak out, not to be afraid, but to be brave and courageous, be strong and courageous, and to speak out for who knows that we have not been called for such a time as this. And if we remain silent, as you know, we know what can be the result of that. The our Father's house can be destroyed, right? So it's so important in today's world that we speak out. We find it in the courage and the strength to speak up and to speak out against these things. Because otherwise, God's people can be destroyed. And we don't want that to happen to anybody. And I'm not going to go into um, what we need to speak out on, but I think you can figure that out. Um, I could do a whole nother video on that right now with what's coming out about this. Um, but I'm not going to go there today. But guys, I'm just so thankful that, you know, we've been called. We've been called to rise up for such a time as this and to speak out and to continue to stand, having done all to stand firm on the word of God, having done all to stand until the day that the Lord comes to take us to himself, which we know is coming. So, also, I've thought it very fitting that today is also St. Patrick's Day, and um, when St. Patrick went to Ireland, he ended up becoming uh, sold in. He was sold. captured and um, sold into slavery, basically. And then I think he was age 17 or something, I don't know. And then when he was around the age of 22, he escaped and he went back to Britain, which was his hometown. And then eventually he was called to go back to Ireland to preach the gospel, the good news of Christ. And this was back in the 400 some AD, 420 something AD. So this was so long ago, but um, you know, I do have a wee bit of Irish in me, a wee bit. Um, so of course McCarthy, I know my husband's family came over to the United States from Ireland. I believe it was his grandmother. Um, so we've got a rich uh, Irish heritage there, as well as English. But anyway, so we're just very thankful. Um, you know, I'm just amazed, blown away at the fact that God sees fit for me, you know, to be here for such a time as this. And I know He's called you to be there too. You be here during this time as well. So um, we have an uh, an awesome job. We got a job to do while we're here, and I just encourage you to stand up and to speak out just like Esther did, and to arise and shine, and to do what the Lord's calling you to do, whatever that might be. Speak out, um, preach the word, preach the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, so that all may come to uh, salvation, just like Saint Patrick did. So I'm just, he was, he became a martyr, but then God used him. Through that time, he grew closer to the Lord, and it was the Lord that helped him through that time. And so I think that was God's way of strengthening him and his faith. And so he could eventually go back there and uh, share the gospel with Ireland, all of Ireland. So pretty much the people of Ireland. So just remember that, that no matter what we go through, no matter the trials and tribulations, which we know in this world we will have tribulation, but we got to take heart, cheer up, because Jesus has overcome the world, right? So, and He's gone before us to prepare a place for us. And if He goes to prepare a place for us, He will come back and receive us to Himself. Um, so, so that we will be where He is also. So let's encourage each other with that word, you know, and I just wish everybody a happy St. Patrick's Day, a happy Purim. I believe it goes through the next 2 days. Um, so today and tomorrow. And Lord, I just, God loves you. I love you. God bless you. And have a great day, everybody. Till next time. Bye bye. Shalom.